Namaskar and welcome to the 8th online Dattopant Thengde lecture series organized by the Akhil Bharatiya Adhivakta Parishad, which is being watched by thousands and thousands of people all across India and abroad. And the number is only increasing by the day. The topic which we are going to discuss today is enforcement of foreign award, including recent developments. Now, why this topic is very, very important and relevant in today's time is because of the fact that a number of parties in commercial as well as non commercial matters are resorting to arbitration more and more because of its ease of choosing their place of arbitration, ease of choosing the procedure of arbitration, the rules, and even the country of enforcement. As we all know that there have been a number of changes and developments in this field, including the fact that even the Arbitration and Conciliation Act has been amended a number of times recently, including the latest one in 1999. That is why we need to discuss this topic at length for the benefit of advocates practicing in this field all over the country. And the speaker we have with us today is a very eminent personality. He is a legal luminary in this field. We have with us today Senior Advocate Mr. K.V. Viswanathan. Sir, we welcome you to this online lecture series. A very short introduction of Senior Advocate Mr. Viswanathan. Although we know you, sir, very well, but still to follow the protocol of our organization. Mr. K.V. Viswanathan was designated as a senior by Honorable Supreme Court of India in the year 2009. Sir has an experience of more than 32 years in practice. Sir was Additional Solicitor General of India between 2013 and 14. Mr. Viswanathan has been briefed to appear in various commercial, constitutional, and arbitration matters all over the country, of course, including the Supreme Court of India. Sir has appeared in a number of cases where judgments have been reported. We have a number of reported arbitration judgments which we read where Sir had assisted the court, including as amicus curiae. Sir, we request you to kindly enlighten us on this topic.
And a very good evening to all of you. Thank you for taking out time this evening to come and have an interaction, is how I would like to call this session, on a topic of seminal significance. But before I address you, ladies and gentlemen, let me congratulate the Akhil Bharatiya Adhivakta Parishad for organizing these webinar lectures on topics of grave public importance. We have had 7 lectures before, each of them addressed by illustrious lawyers, all of them friends of mine. And at this time, when we are all undergoing a difficult time, but I can tell you that the leadership, the Prime Minister has taken the command, and we are now on way to virtual eradication, I would say, in a few weeks. So the important thing is to keep the positivity, to keep the spirit, and in no better way than to equip ourselves. When I say I am here to speak to you, it has been a learning experience for me. I was forced to look up various things to brush up a lot of aspects. Now, this topic, enforcement of foreign arbitral awards and the recent developments, would be of practical assistance, would be of day-to-day use to many of you. Today, arbitration, it cannot be disputed, as caught up in a very big way. It is a most effective alternative form of dispute resolution. And particularly the category that we are dealing with, foreign arbitral awards in foreign seated arbitrations. It's resulted in a lot of case law, a lot of nuanced interpretation of statutes, And it's time that each one of us keeps pace with those developments. I am aware that among the audience would be a wide range of practitioners, people who are experts in this, people who do this day after day. But there would also be lawyers who are beginners, the younger community, the law students. So pardon me if I refer to some basic provisions, some basic principles, because I have uppermost in my mind their interests. Now, what is it about? We are going to deal with enforcement of foreign awards. Tomorrow, you may be engaged by a party who comes to you with a foreign award passed in London, Tokyo, any of the foreign seated arbitrations, and we will deal with the definitions. I'll try and take you through a PowerPoint which I've made for you with the assistance of my team. They come to you and say that this needs to be enforced because otherwise it will be a paper decree. Now, if it is a judgment of a foreign court, as many of you would be used to, the first thing you would examine is, does 44A of the CPC apply? Is it a reciprocating territory? And if it is so, file an execution petition and treat it like a normal execution under which some defenses are available. If it is not a reciprocating treaty, you will be forced to sue under Section 13 on the basis of the judgment and obtain a decree. But we are in a category where there is an arbitration award among the New York Convention signatories, notified by the government. All the ingredients of Section 44 get satisfied, and the client says the judgment debtor or the award debtor has assets in India, assets in the state where you're practicing. Kindly enforce it because I need to realize the fruits of my decree. So the provision that will apply is Part 2 of the Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996. All that you have to see is it a foreign arbitral award? We will go down to the provisions. I am now giving you an overview. Is it a notified country? Because we have insisted on reciprocity. And then you lodge the enforcement petition. The recognition, enforcement, execution is all rolled into one. What happens then is you have certain prerequisites which you need to file with it. And don't worry, if you don't have it at the filing stage, the Supreme Court has said, and we will show you that judgment, that you could file it later. To that extent, it is directory, but you need to file it before the proceedings commence. And then the onus shifts on the award debtor to resist the enforcement. Now, this is significant because the position was completely the opposite before the New York Convention. Under the then existing Geneva Convention, the onus to prove that there was a valid award was first on the judgment holder, the award holder, who need to get an affirmation in the foreign country and then come and establish it with taking the onus on him. Today, with the New York Convention, the onus is now on the award debtor, and there will be some of you who will be engaged to defend an award, to defend execution, to resist. He'll come and tell you, sir, under these circumstances, the award has come to be passed. Oh, madam, kindly resist this. Now, can you treat it like a written statement in a suit? There are some principles which are basic ground norms. It is not a review on the merits. There is a pro-enforcement bias. Now, each of these will be shown to you. Don't take the trouble of those of you wanting to note down. I hope the PowerPoint will open up and help us and walk us through the provisions. There are categorized exhaustive objections set out in 48. So the counsels for the judgment award debtor would have to bring the case within the four contours of that. We will see what they are, where there is no arbitration agreement, where the disputes are not arbitrable, where there is inability to present the case? What are the interpretations given? And the more fundamental one is it's opposed to the public policy. What does it mean? How do you construe it? Or the disputes are non-arbitrable. The insolvency matter, matrimonial matter. I'm sure Booz Allen must be ringing in your mind. We will deal with all that. So you need to know what are the contours of it. Where do you place the objection? The onus is heavily on you. And today the position is, with regard to matters which are purely individual as opposed to public policy and jurisdictional issues, the court has even discretion, because we are in a pro-enforcement era. No party can go back without the fruits of his success. Court may say, look, you have made out an objection, but I still feel I will enforce the award. So they have construed the word may as a discretionary may with regard to matters within your control, not with regard to matters of jurisdiction, not with regard to matters of fundamental public policy affecting the core of the Indian ethos, not normal violations of statutes. We will briefly touch upon them. Idea is, you remember what the Privy Council said with regard to normal decrees and execution. The travails of a decree holder in India began after the decree was passed, because there were 106 rules in Order 21. And there were specialist execution objectors who would come and raise a hurdle at every single point. Now, since that was not to happen to an award, people are resorting to arbitration because it's available as an efficacious, time-saving, quick remedy as opposed to litigating in a foreign court. You can have experts to decide. Some of them may be pure technological matters involving patent law. You have to get into the technicality. Coal mining, you have to see the mining plan. So you can have experts in as arbitrators who will help you decide it quickly. So arbitration has come to stay. Awards will be passed. So the country now has an obligation under the Constitution. Very often we think arbitration is a statute purely for the commercially minded lawyers. But there is an Article 51 in the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, which says that we will do everything to give effect to our treaty obligation. In fact, my PowerPoint begins with that. And you will facilitate adjudication through arbitration, constitutional provision. So in order to invite investments today, we are not seen as a recalcitrant country which resists and delays enforcement. We have fallen in line with the New York Convention, which is the predominant area. Forget the Geneva Convention. Disputes don't arise, don't come. Nothing has arisen. So you need to concentrate on that. You need to know what to tell your client about enforcement, about objection. And in this background, facilitate the recovery if you are for the applicant, or to raise objections. There could be valid objections. There may have been a complete violation of natural justice touching the core of the matter, that grave injustice. Courts will say, no, my rule of law, my public policy insists that I prevent enforcement. Maybe you will be able to make out a case. That will depend on the facts of the case, but there are some well laid out principles for this which we must be aware of. So if with that background we could first run through the PowerPoint so that we see the scheme, we see the provisions, some case laws are mentioned there. Certain preliminary aspects which we need to bear in mind was, what is the limitation that will apply? Maybe one of the doubts which will arise. Now today, for a foreign decree, a recent judgment 3 weeks back in the case of Bank of Baroda versus HDFC has said that a foreign decree not executed abroad, even partly, Article 137 would apply. They fixed it at 3 years. But if it is partly executed, then they have made an exception. They have applied the foreign arbitration provision, but predominantly it will be 137, which will be 3 years from the date the award is made. Now, there is a peculiarity which may arise, and I will flag that issue for you to consider further and study. The award is enforced, and Section 49 says on enforcement, it becomes a decree. So the filing of an application is for the enforcement, which will be an application, which will be 3 years. But what will happen if it is to be deemed to be a decree of that court, and with the court here is the High Court for foreign arbitral awards? Suppose you will have to go from state to execute the decree, because you can file any number of execution petitions. Would then the 3-year norm apply, or would it be a decree under 49 by the High Court with the fiction of an Indian decree? And if you have to carry that fiction to a logical end, would you have the 12-year norm as some high courts have taken at that stage, even though it may be 3 years at the stage of applying for enforcement? After you get objections are overruled and you get the decree, what will be the position is something which you have to examine. My view is on an application, it will be 3 years, but once it becomes a decree, it is not a foreign decree as held in Bank of Baroda. It will be a decree then of that court, it says, in which case it will be in the interest of the decree holder, because if he has to locate the assets, and for that part to make it 12 years, debatable. Now, in this background, let us see a few provisions. Now, at the very outset, Article 51 of the Constitution, the state shall endeavor to foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in the dealings of organized people with one another, and encourage settlement of international dispute by arbitration. The Constitution itself provides a bias in favor for enforcement, and that is the ruling. We need to foster treaty obligations. We have signed the New York Convention. We are a signatory. If it is a notified country, then the enforcement bias will kick in, the enforcement machinery will start. And then let's see the next one. What is a foreign award? Basic, but as we go along, I will tell you the nuances. It has to be an arbitral award on differences between persons arising out of legal relationship, whether contractual or not. Now, considered as commercial, mark the word. Debates have arisen whether an investment treaty award is a commercial award. I would be personally inclined to think that word commercial has been broadly interpreted already in judgments. And unless you cover that, you could face international opprobrium. So an interpretation that would favor enforcement would mean that all awards would be included as long as it has some nexus with commercial transactions. And it has to be in pursuance of an agreement in writing for arbitration, which can be by exchange of letters, because both the definition and the convention itself makes it clear. B is very important. In one of such territories as the central government being satisfied that reciprocal provisions have been made by notification in the official gazette, declared to be territories to which the convention applies. Now, this reciprocity was a permissible derogation to the convention. The convention itself said you could insist on the fact that the country whose award it is has recognized your awards and has notified you. So we have accepted that capacity to derogate and have notified those countries where reciprocity is guaranteed. So you'll have to be first convinced that it is a foreign award, ingredients being satisfied, because this will be the objection raised otherwise. Limitation, then you see the court in which you go, that will be the High Court now for foreign arbitral awards. This is about the New York Convention, which I've already told you about the right to derogate and insist on reciprocity. If you don't care for my award, I will not care for you. Then we see the enforcement regimes. That is the pre-96. The New York Convention awards were enforced through the Foreign Awards Recognition and Enforcement Act 1961, the Renusaga judgment of 94, which holds the field except to the extent of interest of India being deleted now, continues to hold the field. That was the case under the Foreign Awards Act of 1961. And then the Geneva Convention were enforced through the Arbitration Protocol and Convention Act 1937. Now, New York Convention awards are enforced under 44 to 52, and the Geneva Convention awards are under 53 to 60. 7-8 sections, but a lot of case law, a lot of interpretation, a lot of nuances. A paying field, but if you're well equipped, I think sky is the limit. Now, enforcement, the objective. One of the leading treatises, which is the Locus Classicus today, and it is a book which any practitioner ought to possess, is Honorable Justice Indu Malhotra's book on the commentary on the law of arbitration. That sets out the main objective of the convention to be the single uniform set of rules for recognition and enforcement, shifting the burden of proof of proving the award from the award holder to the debtor, elimination of double executor. Don't worry, I will explain to you what it is, where confirmation of finality has to be obtained from the seat court. Originally, this principle was in vogue under the Geneva Convention. You go there, obtain, come here, obtain, all this. They said nothing doing now. They want to simplify. We're all commercially savvy parties of countries which are looking at foreign investments. Once there is an award by a country whom we recognize and notify, we will facilitate enforcement, shift the burden on the debtor, award debtor, no double executor, owner shifts straight away, enforcement subject to the gateways. You remember the MRTP Act had gateways, the Competition Act has some gateways. These are the gateways, if you permit me to use that phraseology. Now, enforcement stages, something I've already told you, the PEC judgment is an important judgment. Justice Nageshwar Rao speaking for the court. Parties were raising technical objection that along with the application, there's not filed this, not filed that. He said, at the stage, I will construe shall as may, a very pro-arbitration interpretation, keeping in lines with the international principles. But it is not that you are condoned for all times to come. You ought to file this, but if merely because you have not filed it at the application stage, you won't be thrown out. Which court? If you go by the part 1, it is the civil court to which the jurisdiction would lay in the official, etc. But here they have now made it very clear it is the High Court. And the Balco judgment, which is an important milestone judgment for any arbitration practitioner, has said it will be the court in which the assets are located. So that is clear, limitation is clear, the ingredients to file the application are clear. Limitation is what I've told you. This Bank of Baroda is a recent judgment of 17th March. It repays study because the views were muddled as far as foreign decree was concerned. Just remember, this is a judgment dealing with a foreign decree, not an arbitration award. But the principles will apply. It's a very important judgment. They refer to books on private international law, they refer to Dicey. And there was an old Madras judgment which I was planning to rely on one of my pending matters, but this case has made the job easier, which said the limitation in the country of the decree would apply. But this has clarified everything. It has said that it is the Article 137 if it is a vanilla situation where there has been no execution. But if partly executed, they have granted the limitation of the foreign statute. But for our purpose, application, enforcement, 137, once it becomes a decree, some court will pronounce on that. High courts have said it is 12 years. We will have to wait and watch. My personal view, 3 years for filing the application. But once you get a decree, you need to ferret out the assets. So you'll have to have that time. And it's a decree of the Indian court, then it is deemed as an Indian court decree. Is it a full fiction, limited fiction? All that will be argued. Then we come to the respondent side. Those of you briefed by the party to say that, look, I'm now stuck with this, but do something. We have a secondary jurisdiction. We cannot set aside the award. We can only refuse enforcement. There is a very, very fundamental distinction. If it is an award in London, the local act will apply because it is the seat will be the English seat, and we are dealing with foreign awards. He need to move under the local act there, 68 or 96, depending on what the provision is. 96, I think now. Here we are only secondary jurisdiction. It's a phrase used in an American case law. We have to either enforce it or refuse it. And what are the basic principles? No review on the merits. It's not a written statement that you're preparing. Don't nitpick the award. Don't say that plaintiff witness has said this, defendant witness, don't start. You'll have to attack the broad heads, which we will come to in the next slide. 2, the grounds are exhaustive. What are the grounds? The very next slide will deal with that. The grounds are to be construed narrowly. We are on a pro-enforcement bias scenario that's accepted, mentioned in a judgment. Residual discretion available with the courts to enforce the award, even if objections under 48 can be sustained. If you see the section 48, it opens with the word may refuse enforcement. It was argued very recently also in a case called Vijay Karya versus Prismi and Kavi. It is part of the PowerPoint. That this is a discretion. The English courts in Dhala and other cases have accepted it. Court has made a very fine distinction. It said matters concerning the individual, those grounds, even if made out, court can take an overall view and say, I'm enforcing it. Objection, all right, but I will not refuse. Number 2, matters of affecting the core policy, the ethos of the country, not mere statutory violation, no discretion. Matters of jurisdiction, no discretion. And I will show you the Mexican court and the US case when we go down, and I'll give an illustration to you. One of the grounds is that if the award is pending in challenge, 48.3 says you may defer after taking security. Questions have arisen, what happens if the award is set aside in the seat court or the seat state? Award passed in London, application for enforcement filed here, court says, all right, I will await, but suddenly one fine morning award is set aside. What is the position? Does the discretion vest? The law appears to be that if it is a justice-oriented approach which has set it aside, no problem. But if the setting aside order reeks of corruption, reeks of injustice, Indian courts are not powerless to say that even if the award is set aside in the seat court, we will still enforce it. A situation arose in a case called Penex in the Mexican court, which set aside, but the US court went ahead and enforced it. English courts have enforced, even though the French court subsequently set aside the award. The classic example I can think of is this. Imagine a country democratically ruled with an independent judiciary, proper arbitration institutions, arbitration award made, party wants to enforce it. Between the filing of the enforcement petition and the ordering of it, the militia takes over, similar to the Taliban takes over there. The Taliban court has a kangaroo court kind of a scenario, and it sets aside the award to favor a party who has been a big financier. Should the Indian court throw up its hands and say that in the court of its seat it is set aside? I am very confident that the Indian court will say rule of law mandates, public policy dictates that enforcing the award will be in furtherance of the rule of law, furtherance of public policy than refusing enforcement. I will go ahead and enforce it. That residual power is still available. Keep that distinction in mind, but very, very narrowly exercised. Once it is set aside by a proper court, normally courts will not enforce. But it is not that they don't have the discretion. Penultimate line, there is a pro-enforcement bias towards enforcing the award. Idea is international business parties, commercially savvy, entered into a contract, submitted disputes to a body which they chose, award passed, and now no question of turning around. And no nitpicking the award, an aspect which I have already mentioned to you. Objections allowed under 48. very important, held to be exhaustive, narrowly tailored. Parties to the agreement under some incapacity. We have tried to have individual slides for this, so at the moment, run with this through with me. Parties to the agreement under some incapacity, not capacity, no capacity to contract, which means no capacity to enter into arbitration agreement, minors contract, other incapacities. No proper notice of appointment of arbitrator or of arbitral proceeding was given. Very narrowly construed. If you have participated, there is a acquiescence waiver, nothing doing. But a gross case, something behind your back, you're able to establish, you may be able to resist enforcement. Award deals with disputes not contemplated within the terms. Suppose it's a matter which is not contemplated within the contract. There again, acquiescence has had a sway. We will see it in the individual slides. Composition of the tribunal or the procedure followed by the tribunal was not in accordance to the agreement or the law of that country. Suppose the contractual provision was not followed, or in a default clause, the statutory provision was not followed. But there again, if you have participated, in a very rare cases, you can expect to succeed. Award has not yet become binding upon the parties or has been set aside by a competent court. And this is very crucial. Questions have arisen now because of the residual discretion. I've already adverted to you about my view in the matter. The subject matter of the dispute is not capable of being settled by under Indian law. 48(2)(a), the Booz-Allen principle, matrimonial disputes, disputes which are in rem, insolvency matters, criminal matters. We will try and give you illustrations as we go along. Enforcement of the award would be contrary to the public policy of India. Construed narrowly, first in Renusaga, followed in Lal Mahal, after a brief aberration in a case called Fulchand. But hats off to Justice Lodha, who spoke both in Fulchand and Lal Mahal, the great judge that he is. He went back and said, no, I'm going back to the Renusagar ruling. It is narrow. The amendments have further narrowed it because interest of India has been now removed. We'll see it now. 2015 amendment explanation 1 and 2 have been added to 48(2), clarifies that the award is in conflict with the public policy only when induced by fraud or corruption or contravenes the fundamental policy of Indian law or is against the most basic notions of morality and justice. Explanation 2 further clarifies that no review on merits is permissible to test contravention of the fundamental policy of Indian law. 48(1)(a), under this provision, the enforcement of a financial award may be refused if a party to that agreement under the law applicable to it was under some incapacity to contract, or effect of annulling. Very rarely you will have this situation, but you need to be aware. You need to do a check. It's better to call it, you tick the boxes, you tick all these boxes, box number 1. B, depends upon the facts of each case, failed to take advantage of the opportunity. You see, inability to present the case, further clarified by nuanced holdings. Inability to present the case would not be accepted if he has failed to take advantage of an opportunity afforded. The impact of the procedural lapse to the overall fairness of the arbitration, which is a crucial test. And these are principles from Justice Malhotra's book. I have taken the liberty of bringing it to your notice in the form of a PowerPoint. Only if the arbitration proceedings are proved to be unreasonable and unfair that an objection under 48, pardon the typo there, 1B of the Act is likely to be accepted. This is an interesting case, Min Metal, followed recently by Justice Nariman's judgment, the locus classicus Vijay Kharya. Inability to present a case to arbitrators contemplate at least that the enforcee has been prevented from presenting his case by matters outside his control. Now mark this word. You can't take a matter which was within your control, not follow it then, and then, wake up at the enforcement stage and say, look, violation of natural justice. Courts will say, nothing doing. They normally cover a case where the procedure adopted has been operated in a manner contrary to the rules of natural justice. Extremely narrowly, it ought to be beyond your control. It ought to be a matter which touches the very basic rules of justice, and such violations Not every violation, may pass muster. 1C, the principle is this: if it is an excess of authority, all right, we'll have a look at it, look at the award, a holistic perspective. Pragmatic and holistic perspective will be adopted while considering the objection. It's only when the foreign award is entirely baseless. So it's very difficult to find edgeways with these grounds. Composition of the arbitral tribunal, the procedure which I've already adverted to, not in accordance with the agreement. You see, notice, reply, 20 days, but all that is past and done. You have submitted to an arbitration. You have waived all these rights. But in a given case where you are not aware, completely behind your back, there are cases like that. I don't say that. Very often it arises in, these association arbitrations. Cotton Merchant Association and this association, they have the notions of justice they adopt are a little far too liberal for being palatable. E, award has not become binding or has been set aside or suspended by a competent authority of the country in which or under the law which the award was made. However, the use of the word may, and mark this because Vijay Karya now, that is the Prismian Kavi, Vijay Karya versus Prismian Kavi, we'll give you the citation, has said there is a residual discretion. May in the provision has given the scope for rejecting objections if in exceptional cases award is set aside for wholly unacceptable reasons. The inquiry will be whether public policy of and the rule of law in India would be furthered by the enforcement or frustrated by the enforcement. Keep the Taliban example in mind. Democratic country, proper institutional arbitration, duly passed award, subsequent change, overthrowal, set aside, or even lesser than that. On the face of it, reeks of corruption. Classic case of Penex exploration, despite overrunning of award in the seat jurisdiction, was nevertheless enforced in the secondary jurisdiction, namely United States. That is where you get the words. Enforcing it will further the public policy, further the rule of law. We will go ahead and enforce it. Then I have repeated the elimination of the double executor principle. The courts in India do not require a foreign award to be confirmed or enforced in the jurisdiction of its origin before they could be enforced. Thus, the double executor rule has rightly been not followed by the courts in India. This is an area where you may have some play in the joints. So those of you trying to resist enforcement, these are the provisions to look at. 48(2)(a) of the Act permits a court to refuse enforcement of a foreign award on the ground that if the subject matter of the dispute is not capable of settlement by arbitration under the law of India, and the award shall not be enforced. Bose Allen, Justice Ravindran, speaking for the court, minutely analyzed, thoroughly dealt with the distinction between in personam, in rem proceedings, proceedings beyond the ken of arbitration, rights and liabilities which give rise to or arise out of criminal offences, matrimonial disputes, divorce, judicial separation, restitution of conjugal rights, guardianship matters, insolvency and winding up matters, testamentary matters, eviction or tenancy matters governed by special statutes. Now, I'll just mark this. I have some observation here. Added to this is a trust dispute, which has been recently followed in a judgment. Tenancy, you see, governed by special statutes. We have a number of rent control laws, setting up tribunals with special defenses, special grounds for landlords have to make out. They are beyond the ken. But in a case called Vidya Darolia, the judgment of which is pending, in a normal ejectment suit after a termination notice under 106, that principle was applied. So there has been a reference to 3 judges saying whether the extension of the special statute norm and keeping that outside arbitration to ejectment suits under the Transfer of Property Act would be governed. Judgment is reserved. We will have to await the court's judgment in Vidya Darolia. Now, 48(2)(b), yeah. The court can refuse enforcement if the enforcement of the award would be contrary to the public policy of India. Now, this is an area where there is a lot of case law. It is not just a violation. It is something which goes to the root of the matter. 2015 amendment has clarified the position by adding explanation 1 and 2, which I read earlier, induced by fraud or corruption or contravenes the fundamental policy of law or is against the most basic notions of morality. You won't find the word interests of India here. Renu Sagar, yes, but here, no, now. Explanation 2 further clarifies that no review on merits is permissible to test contravention of fundamental policy of India. Law Commission recommended no review on merits. The Renu Sagar principle reiterated, but illegality must go to the root of the matter. It's a trivial nature illegality. Court will say nothing doing. Award could also be set aside so unfair and unreasonable that it shocks the conscience of the court. But that's an extreme scenario. Cases have arisen under FEMA violations. The Delhi High Court, in one of the cases which I will show you in the other slide, called Cruz City, a judgment which repays study, Justice Bakru speaking for the court, an exhaustive judgment, has made a neat classification of how FEMA and FERA are two different regimes. How under FEMA it is the RBI which has to permit or not permit. And there are cases like Docomo where even RBI's intervention was deprecated and they said nothing doing, what's your concern? There is an award, it's not void, payment has to go. Now these defenses are taken by some parties even where money is coming into India. Frivolous objections, but they have been dealt with severely. It's the RBI's domain. You remember specific performance. We all go and seek specific performance. There may be a condition that you must obtain the permission of the authority. Now, merely because the permission is required, specific performance won't be denied. I think Chandanwati, Maten and those line of cases, 63. That has been followed here. FEMA is purely, regulatory. RBI will take care of it. That won't hold back enforcement. 48.3 is where, parties come and say, look, I have filed an application there in England or in Tokyo, set aside, kindly wait for that. Court may exercise a discretion, but it will take a security. It can ask the party to furnish security so that, tomorrow they're going to turn around and say that there is nothing, they've dissipated the assets so that the judgment holder, award holder is secure. Thereafter, you have Renu Sagar. I have told you a number of times, this was under the Foreign Awards Act of 1961. Just see the last 3 lines. It then said, it has to be fundamental policy of Indian law, interests of India now not available, justice or morality. Followed in Lal Mahal. I told you about the minor aberration that happened in Fulchand. Quickly, we were back on track. Lal Chand said, narrow interpretation of public policy. That's Renu Sagar, aligned with Renu Sagar. Then you come to the judgment which is of a recent origin, February. I think there's only one more after this which has come 3 days back. We'll deal with that. Now, this is an important case where several objections were taken. I'll just read this for you because this is the locus classicus. It's a bench of 3. This is Nariman spoke for the court. Each aspect has been dealt with here, except maybe 48(1)(a), which the lordships were not concerned. But otherwise, a close reading and assimilation of this judgment would, by and large, give us the complete idea of the state of the law as on today. Defense of public policy is permissible, should be construed narrowly. I've already told you. Grounds relating to patent illegality appearing on the face of the award are outside the scope of interference with foreign awards, whose enforcement is resisted in India. The general pro-enforcement bias, a word picked up from Parsons and Whitmore, a US judgment, which used this phrase, because that is the approach of the court. A court will look to sustain the award. The approach will be to sustain unless you make out a very strong case. That is in line with the international treaty. And unless that approach is continued, as a nation, we may suffer. Forget individual parties. Again, Correa on residual discretion. look at the fine classification made. Even if grounds for refusal of recognition and enforcement of an award are proved to exist, the enforcing court is not obliged to refuse enforcement. The language is permissive, not mandatory. Redfern and Hunter. It also refers to 3 other treatises. Grounds for resisting enforcement of a foreign award under 48 are classified into 3 groups. Grounds which affect the jurisdiction, no agreement, in excess, etc., not arbitrable. Grounds which affect party interest alone, no notice, unable to present the case. Grounds which go to the public policy. On the grounds of jurisdiction and public policy, no discretion. On the grounds of party interest, discretion is there. So which means you need to make out a very, very strong case which will have to, virtually shake the conscience of the court. On inability to present the case, therefore, Lordships followed Minmetal and other judgments, which is mentioned in the next note. Look at this para. The parties to an arbitration do not have a right to a correct decision. You can't say this is the decision which it should come. It's an arbitrator's prerogative as to which way he goes. Object of 48 is to enforce foreign awards subject to certain well-defined narrow exceptions. The expression was otherwise unable to present the case, a phrase occurring in the New York Convention repeated in 48.1b, occurring in 48.1b, cannot be given an expansive meaning and would have to be read in the context of and color of the words preceding the said phrase. In short, this expression would be a facet of natural justice which would be breached only if a fair hearing was not given by the arbitrator to the parties. Read along with the first part of 48.1b, it is clear that this expression would apply at the hearing stage and not after the award has been delivered, as has been held in SsangYong, a judgment which came a little earlier to it. A good working test for determining whether a party has been unable to present this case is to see whether factors outside the party's control, number 1, have combined to deny the party a fair hearing. Not if you could have discovered a document, you don't discover it. Thus, which go behind the back of the party and results in a denial. Thus, where no opportunity was given to deal with an argument, which goes to the root of the case of findings based on evidence which go behind the back of the party and which results in a denial of justice to the prejudice of the party, or additional or new evidence is taken which forms the basis of the award on which a party has been given no opportunity of rebuttal, would on the facts of a given case render a foreign award liable to be set aside on the ground that a party has been unable to present this case. This must of course be with the caveat that such breach be clearly made out on the facts of a given case, and that awards must always be read supportively with an intention to uphold rather than destroy, given the minimal interference possible with foreign awards under Section 48. So these are very important because many parties would come and say that, is unable to present the case, but lawyers who are enforcing it need to, use this para, and the lawyers who are resisting need to make out a very, very strong case. This was an interesting case referred to in Vijay Karya versus Prismian. Deliberate refusal to comply with the discovery order is not per se a contravention of public policy because the adversarial procedure in arbitration admits of the possible sanction of an adverse inference being drawn against the party that does not produce the document in question in compliance with an order. That is, if a discovery order was made for whatever reason not produced, the arbitrator is not chosen to draw the adverse inference, so be it. That won't be a ground here. In Joff Lazar versus AMCI, where the US District Court of Pennsylvania decided that if a party fails to obey procedural orders given by the arbitrator, it must suffer the consequences. If evidence is excluded because it is not submitted in accordance with the procedural order, party cannot purposefully ignore the procedural directives of the decision-making body and then successfully claim that the procedures were unfair. Anything you need to challenge then and there. That's the most important aspect. Then we come to FEMA. I briefly dealt with it. Cruz City is an important judgment. Cruz City is, the reasoning is accepted. It is affirmed here. Accepting the reasoning in Cruz City said that the FEMA, unlike FERA, refers to the nation's policy of managing foreign exchange instead of policing foreign exchange, policemen being the RBI. Further, even if the Reserve Bank of India were to take action under FEMA, the non-enforcement of a foreign award on the ground of violation of a FEMA regulation or rule would not arise, as the award does not become void on that ground. In Docomo's case, RBI wanted to intervene, and the single judge did not permit RBI to intervene, saying that no, once I am upholding, enforcing the award, and this is not otherwise invalid, RBI has no business to come, is what they said. That's an important judgment. Fundamental policy of Indian law, as has been held in Renu Sagar, must amount to a breach of some legal principle or legislation which is so basic to Indian law, not susceptible of being compromised. So can't show a provision in the Specific Performance Act, Specific Relief Act, or some statutory provision and say, look, award is invalid. Court will not be inclined to accept that. Fundamental policy refers to the core values of India's public policy as a nation, which may find expression not only in statutes, but also time-honored, hallowed principles which are followed by the courts. And then the ink on this judgment is not dry. It's a judgment of 22nd April. The NAFED judgment where enforcement was not granted, refused. My reading of the judgment is it doesn't deviate from the principles laid down earlier. Unfortunately, the facts were glaring, and there is perhaps one inarticulate premise in the mind of the judge. Though they say that this did not arise and they're not going into it, the nominee arbitrator for the award holder appeared as counsel in an appellate stage of the same proceeding. Though the court says they could have put it on natural justice and finished it. But they have gone on to hold that there was a clause in the contract which said if there is a prohibition by the government, and there was a prohibition of exporting of cotton for a particular season, 1981 to 82, I think, that was found to be a ground which disabled a party from honoring the contract. So on merits, the judgment is suspect because it's purely on the merits of the matter. Arbitrator has construed the contract. He had not seen it as a ban. It has crossed that stage, but the court went into it. The heads of the challenge have not been classified, but fortunately, there is no deviation from the well-established principles. So my reading is, while NAFED will be cited as a Bible by all those who are wanting to resist by showing something or the other, you are going to have a long line of judgments which will distinguish NAFED and which will say that this has gone into the confined to the facts. The earlier judgments of the other three honorable judges, Vijay Karya, Lal Mahal, Renu Sagar, do not bring it under the rubric of public policy in the sense of a core value being impacted. So with this, we have finished with the statutory scheme, the principles, the points to be kept in mind, both by the party seeking to enforce it and the party seeking to resist it. After all, the idea is to enforce an award. He's got a hard-fought victory. You went into the arbitration. You had your own choice of the institution. And today we have a pro-enforcement bias. So I would see 9 out of 10 awards getting enforced, and that is how it should be when parties contract. These are the broad issues. There are other minor aspects dealt with in the book, but they don't crop up every time. In cases where we are engaged, these are the issues which will crop up, and as long as we keep this in mind, I think we would have done justice to the case. I hope you have benefited from this interaction as much as I have benefited from the session I've had with you, the study that preceded it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for taking out time this evening. And I once again conclude by congratulating Akhil Bharatiya Adhivakta Parishad for upholding the principles under which they were started by Sri Dattopantji. And I wish the series all success. I wish all of you well. Stay home, stay safe. We should be through with this. These are challenging times. It's easier to say that it is time to equip. You will have your mood swings. I have the younger lot in mind, but don't lose hope. this too will pass. And all the best to you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
sir.
Manisha, for the introduction. Thank you,
Thank you.
Nachiketa, Tendu, Shubhendu, Manish, and others who interacted with me, who had a trial run with me yesterday. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks to you, sir. We are, in fact, very grateful for such an exhaustive coverage of such a vast subject in such a simple manner. After hearing your discussion, it appears to us that Section 48 and all the related sections are not just a part in the Act, but a complete code in themselves. So, and we are now much more clear on all the regimes and how to get an award enforced, as well as how to not get an award enforced. So, whether we are an advocate at this side or at that side, your conversation today is going to guide us a lot, sir. Thank you. And now, with your permission, we have some questions written. So, if you allow us, let me start with the questions. The first question which is coming is by Alpana ji. Alpana ji has asked, what are the documents and evidence required to be produced when a party applying for enforcement of a foreign award in India at the time of filing application before the court? She wants to ask what all documents are to be filed along with an enforcement application.
Thank you, Ms. Alpana, for the question. All that you need to see is Section 47 and the judgment in PEC, referred to in my slide. You can go back to the slide or go back to the section. Original award or a copy thereof, duly authenticated. Original agreement. Such evidence as may be necessary to prove that the award is a foreign award. Ingredients of 44. Notification if it is going to be disputed. The agreement, the enclosing letter from the foreign institution. Read with the PEC judgment. Don't worry if you don't have it at the initial stage, but you need to have it at some stage. You can't have it without it. It's held to be directory insofar as the stage of filing the matter is concerned. But as long as you have this, it is more than enough.
Thank you, sir. The next question is asked by Advocate Bhaskar ji, and he wants to ask, as you said, that the court of jurisdiction in India will be a high court. So he is asking, which high court will it be? Is it the high court where subject matter is situate, or if subject matter is not situate here, how do we decide which high court has jurisdiction?
I think para 97 of the Balco judgment, also referred to in my PowerPoint, says where the assets are located. So if you find the assets are located in Delhi, if you find they're located in Madras, Chennai, if you find it in Bombay, you will have to go there to that high court. That is very clear from para 97, and it will have to be the high court.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Mr. Ritvik Saha, advocate, and he is saying that the rulings of the Indian Supreme Court in Centrotrade Metals and Minerals Inc. versus Hindustan Copper Limited and Venture Global Engineering versus Satyam Computer Services Limited in the New York Convention manifested. Maybe he wants to ask what is the crux of these two judgments, and they are talking about the New York Convention.
Yeah, as far as Venture Global is concerned, it took a curious turn. It was a foreign-seated arbitration. But unfortunately, between Bhatia and Balco, the first Venture Global judgment came and said, Indian courts will have jurisdiction under 34. Because Balco had extended Section 9, even though it was a Paris-seated, Bhatia had extended Section 9 in a foreign-seated arbitration. Venture Global 2 was on documents. The Venture Global, which is now referred to three honorable judges because of a split judgment between Justice Chalameshwar and Justice Sapre also involves a cross appeal by Satyam, which is Tech Mahindra now, where they have again raised this issue of jurisdiction. Argument being that those were 7-11, Order 7, Rule 11 stages where defense is not looked into, so there's no res judicata. You need to re-agitate the question of jurisdiction because even the High Court against the 34 held against Satyam on that issue of jurisdiction. So it is again being argued. So if the court accepts that earlier venture was wrong and the party is entitled to re-argue, the cross appeal gets allowed, the matter will be thrown out on jurisdiction grounds. They will have to seek, the Tech Mahindra will be seeking enforcement and there will be resistance, etc. Insofar as Centro Trade is concerned, the judgment is reserved. It may not be proper to comment on it. There also, the issue of inability to present the case has been argued. The issue of multi-tier arbitration and its validity have been argued. So, judgment may be pronounced any time. I mean, it's been reserved in February or just before the COVID set in. So, there is no deviation from the principles otherwise. How they apply it to the facts in Centro Trade, we'll have to wait for the judgment.
Thank you, sir, for such detailed knowledge on particular judgments also. So now the next question is from Advocate Bhaskar Gautam from Supreme Court.
The one disclaimer that in Tech Mahindra, that is in the venture case, when the matter got referred, I was one of the counsel who had appeared for Satyam, saying that, look, there is no jurisdiction in the Indian court and the earlier judgment was a 7-11 judgment. On a demurrer, you argue 7-11. My defense was not available. How do you apply res judicata? Res judicata is heard and finally decided in a matter directly arising in issue. It is only now that matter has arisen. So I was aware of that. Centro Trade, I heard recently in a seminar where my friend Gaurav Banerjee, who had appeared, adverted to it and that the judgment is reserved. So that is how I came to know of it.
Yes, sir. We are now much more wiser on particular judgments of Supreme Court after hearing you, sir. So the next question is from Advocate Bhaskar Gautam, and he is asking, sir, in your professional experience, what is the actual time taken to execute a foreign arbitral award in India, considering all the factors involved?
The last judgment of Karya was 2000. There were 4 awards in it, and the last of the award was 2017, I think. It was pending in the Bombay High Court, and then Supreme Court decided expeditiously. Thereafter, the actual execution will begin. But I must tell you that after the White Industries judgment, where the Indian government in an investment in a bilateral treaty arbitration, investment treaty arbitration, had to pay huge compensation because of the delay in parties getting relief, has been an eye-opener. It has been a wake-up call. So courts are conscious of that and every step is taken. But as counsel, we are all resourceful. We want to delay, we delay it. But I think the judges are aware that, and there have been express mention in seminars and talks that we are going to be seriously prejudiced in inter-country bid arbitrations. We have paid a price in white so that it should not recur. Now, coming to your question, at the moment it's between 3 to 4 years. It definitely takes, but I think courts are pressing the accelerator. One way or the other, they would want to know where parties stand. There have been debates about introduction of time limits,
yes,
but that has not happened as yet.
Let us hope that just like we have now introduced time limits on various other practices and procedures in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, we will soon have the same on this particular subject also. So the next question is from Advocate Harinath Reddy, and he is asking, what if the award ignores valid defenses and passes the award without referring to the defenses in the pleadings or documents? Can the award be resisted? If so, to what extent? Because this particular ground is not mentioned as a ground of setting aside a foreign award. That is why.
No, but it has been raised. It is a facet of natural justice, because if reasons are not there, after all, reasons are a link between the facts and the conclusion. But courts have said, and it arose in Vijay Karya, and we had occasion to debate this, referred to an excellent judgment of the Singapore Supreme Court, and a very interesting judgment of the New Zealand Supreme Court on this, that an arbitrator has no obligation to refer to every nitty-gritty argument, as long as his conclusion bear testimony to the fact that he has marshaled the case, is conscious of it. That's enough. There are passages on this. Vijay Karya deals with it. You can't say X paragraph in my reply to the claim not dealt with, this line in the deposition not dealt with. A holistic perspective will be taken. If the court is conscious that he has dealt with it, I think it will not qualify under 48(1)(b), which will come closest to it. You have passages in Karya which deal with it. There are judgments on this very interesting question which Mr. Harinath has raised. What will the arbitrator cogitate in his mind? It need not be, every nitty-gritty. Very words used. It's not my word. I'm quoting from that judgment.
Yes, sir. So therefore, what we get from this is that the principles of natural justice cannot be used to defeat the ends of justice just because nitty-gritties are not mentioned in the award.
That's correct.
Sir, next
But
question is from
in
Advocate
a given case where there are absolutely no material, like the Delhi High Court did in a case referred to in Karya,
Yes.
Mathrubhumi investors, Cosmo versus Mathrubhumi. That has been set aside, that is referred to, but that's pending in appeal. So
let us see what comes. The next question is by Advocate Bharti Tyagi, and she is asking, sir, what would be the course of action after the award is set aside by the seat court?
I think 48(1)(e) gives you the answer. If it is set aside, and if I told you the Taliban example doesn't apply or the Penex example doesn't apply, you'll not be able to enforce it. You need an award to enforce it. Only question is, does it come under the residual discretion? That will be very rarely exercised. It has been exercised hardly once or twice internationally. Penex is one referred to by Justice Malhotra in a book. It has been discussed earlier. Dhala was a case where the proceedings, in terms of time, the English courts went aside and enforced it. Subsequently, it got set aside in France, the government of Pakistan case. But except that, 48(1)(e) will come to the rescue.
Yes, sir. The next question is from Advocate Sandeep Mahapatra from Delhi, and he is asking, while enforcing a foreign award also, execution proceedings as laid down in CPC are required to be followed. Going by the experience, it is an onerous task. What would you say to overcome this?
Hello, Sandeep. I thought we had a pact not to ask inconvenient questions. That's a lighter vein. But then today, with a pro-enforcement bias, Sandeep, the way courts have been proceeding, orders for disclosure of assets, orders for attachment, orders to bring up the enforcement. Even the traditional civil courts are now, unless it's a very valid objection under 47 by the parties to the case or an order 2197, it is not the old scenario anymore. That saying is, yes, the travails of a decree holder in India begins when the execution begins. But today, Courts are more conscious in normal decrees, and even so, with this express direction of a pro-enforcement, any delay in execution will be, deprecated by the higher courts, and things are moving. It'll all depend on how resourceful the lawyer is in keeping on pressing with his matter, and how dynamic the judge is also. But the traditional 106 rules being invoked, all that is gone now.
Thank you, sir. Good answer to a tricky question. The last question of the day is that given the fact that India is robust and capable enough, the courts in India are robust and capable enough to enforce foreign awards and also to refuse them if circumstances are so. What do you think? What message does it throw about Indian courts in the world? And what is the general message and theme of our Arbitration and Conciliation Act so far as it deals with the enforcement of foreign awards?
I think it's very, very positive. I think we have a judiciary which is independent, which is the hallmark of our country, and I think which we should treasure. The judgments that have been coming out are of a very high order. Day is not far off when these judgments will be quoted abroad, not merely the Supreme Court judgments, some of the High Court judgments. Exceptional analysis. And the way we have emerged, I think the prospects are very, very bright. As long as we speed up, address our other pendency issues, see that the other cases don't clog, this is going to get an impetus. And I am positive on this. We have arbitrators who go and sit abroad and decide. Our arbitrators, our individual arbitrators. We have, judges who are conscious of what the approach is in these kind of matters. So I think the last 2 years have been very good. We've had treatises, we've had judgments, and I am I'm an optimist, so I would want to be like that.
Thank you, sir. So therefore, this is an opportunity for the Indian legal system to show its worth to the world out there. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this difficult and complicated subject, which is going to come to us in near future, given the amount of awards and foreign awards we have increasing day by day. Thank you very much. And to all our audience out there, keep watching for our seminars. We are having a long list of seminars, one after the other, and we are going to conduct these seminars. Stay home, stay safe. Let us use this time effectively in things like enlightening ourselves in things that matter to us. Namaskar.
Thank you.